Good morning, faithful listener. You are listening to the Bible Explained podcast, where the Bible gets explained. So grab your cup of coffee and stay tuned as we read through the book of Deuteronomy. Well, hello guys, and thanks for tuning into the Bible Explained podcast. And you know what? This week was the start of Advent. So if you guys haven't gotten a chance to see my new Advent devotional for teen girls, make sure you go check it out, link in bio. But because it is Advent season, you will now hear Christmas music on the podcast. So I hope you like the new Christmas music I picked out. I did not record this one. This was something that I purchased online, but I really liked it. I like the Angels We Have Heard on High rendition. So I just thought it was really cute. But anyway, that's the music you're going to be hearing for the podcast intro, starting today, basically, and ending after Christmas. And I know some people hate Christmas music and are probably already sick of it, even though it just started maybe like a week or two ago. But I know people that are just like, oh, I hate Christmas music so much. So I'm sorry, you'll have to deal with Christmas music on the Bible Explained podcast. That's my gift to you for the next month. But okay, let's go ahead and read Deuteronomy 5 verses, 12 all the way down to the end of the chapter, verse 33. So grab the version of the Bible you prefer. I'll be reading out of the WEB as per usual. But make sure to grab your cup of coffee or your cup of tea also. And let's go ahead and read Deuteronomy 5 verses 12 through 33. Just to give a little recap here, basically we're talking once again about the 10 commandments. We just discussed on Monday the first 3 commandments, which were regarding God and how we should revere God and revere his name, not have any other gods. So if you want to hear that episode, obviously go back to Monday and take a listen to that one. But now we're going to talk about the rest of the 10 commandments, the next 7 ones, which mainly are dealing with how we treat other people. So yes, let's go ahead and read this. Once again, that is Deuteronomy 5 verses 12 through the end of the chapter. Observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy as Yahweh your God commanded you. You shall labor for 6 days and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to Yahweh your God, in which you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your ox, nor your donkey, nor any of your livestock, nor your stranger who is within your gates, that your male servant and your female servant may rest as well as you. You shall remember that you were a servant in the land of Egypt, and Yahweh your God brought you out of there by a mighty hand and by an outstretched arm. Therefore, Yahweh your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. Honor your father and your mother as Yahweh your God commanded you, that your days may be long, and that it may go well with you in the land which Yahweh your God gives you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, neither shall you desire your neighbor's house, his field, or his male servant or his female servant, his ox, his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. Yahweh spoke these words to all your assembly on the mountain out of the middle of the fire, out of the cloud, and of the thick darkness with a great voice. He added no more. He wrote them on 2 stone tablets and gave them to me. When you heard the voice out of the middle of the darkness, while the mountain was burning with fire, you came near to me, even all the heads of your tribes and your elders, and you said, Behold, Yahweh our God has shown us his glory and his greatness, and we have heard his voice out of the middle of the fire. We have seen today that God does speak with man, and he lives. Now therefore, why should we die? For this great fire will consume us. If we hear Yahweh our God's voice any more, then we shall die. For who is there out of all of flesh who has heard the voice of the living God speaking out of the middle of the fire, as we have and lived? Go near and hear all that Yahweh our God shall say, and tell us all that Yahweh our God tells you, and we will hear it and do it. Yahweh heard the voice of your words when you spoke to me, and Yahweh said to me, I have heard the voice of the words of this people which they have spoken to you. They have well said all that they have spoken. Oh, that there were such a heart in them, that they would fear me and keep all my commandments always, that it might be well with them and their children forever. Go tell them, return to your tents. But as for you, stand here by me, and I will tell you all the commandments and the statutes and the ordinances which you shall teach them, that they may do them in the land which I give them to possess. You shall observe and do therefore as Yahweh your God commanded you. You shall not turn away to the right hand or to the left. You shall walk in all the ways which Yahweh your God has commanded you, that you may live and that it may be well with you, and that you may prolong your days in the land which you shall possess. This part makes me feel kind of sad a little bit because of the end result, because God was speaking directly to the entire nation of Israel when he gave them the 10 commandments. Like, they heard his voice directly, and they were so scared that they were like, no more. We don't want to hear God's voice at all anymore. And that's where we see here in verses 23 all the way to the end, verse 33, where the people basically go talk to Moses and they're like, okay, we get it. Like, God's glory is great, but we don't want to hear his voice anymore. Like, that's basically what it's chalked up to, is what the people say. They're just like, yeah, we get that God can speak to us, but we can't hear it. And like, this is sort of where I guess, struggle with it, because it would be so cool and so glorious to hear God's voice. But at the same time, I do in a way sympathize with the people, because I've never heard God's voice and I can't imagine how terrifying it would be. And honestly, I might have the exact same response, so I can't really say. But yet Moses did not have that same response. He truly longed for God's glory. He truly longed to hear God's voice. And I think even Aaron did, Moses' brother, also kind of did at times. So I do wonder why Moses was so different. Like, Moses just had a different heart in him, where he truly just longed to hear God's voice. But yet the people, in their fear and recognition of how little they were compared to God, were unable to hear his voice. And yeah, I mean, even after God directly speaks to them. And I think Moses almost, he's mentioned this a handful of times, because don't forget, I mean, Deuteronomy, I've said this to you guys 1,000 times. Deuteronomy is Moses speaking directly to the people, the history of everything that went on, and just retelling the law to them in his own words. So already Moses has mentioned this issue a few times where the people couldn't hear God's voice. But anyway, let's talk about these last few commandments here from verses 12 all the way through 20. Once again, this is a retelling of the 10 commandments. We went through the first 3 on Monday's episode, but now we're going to talk about the ones relating to other people. And I also should mention here that Jesus actually summed up the 10 commandments with the 2 new commandments. He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, right? And then he also said, and love your neighbor as yourself. And those were the 2 commandments. And both those commandments perfectly summed up the 10 commandments, which is really, really interesting. So yeah, I mean, Jesus basically told everybody, you and me, to follow the 10 commandments, but just summed them up very well into 2 commandments: love God and love others. So right here, verse 12, it talks about observing the Sabbath day and keeping it holy. So in other words, one day out of the week is holy. Holy means set apart. Holy means different. So the Sabbath day was supposed to be different. It was supposed to be set apart. So that was the day where people took a break. It was a holy day of rest, where God commands his people to focus on not just rest, but also on him on the Sabbath day. He says, take a rest. And he says, do this so that your son, your daughter, your male and your female servants, your animals can all have a break. So it wasn't just important for, one individual. It was important for the entire family. We know that sons and daughters obviously are part of the family. But male and female servants at this time period, we had discussed this before. Servants were also supposed to be, in a sense, part of the family. Not to mention work animals. Everything needs rest. Everything just needs a break and needs time off. And that was the point of the Sabbath day. So God tells the people to do a Sabbath day of rest where they focus on him. There's supposed to be like a holy convocation on that day. In other words, a time of fellowship between other people, almost like a church service. And that's why to this day we still go to church on Sundays, even though technically Sunday is not the Sabbath day. Back in these days, it would have technically been a Saturday. But yeah, that's the fourth commandment. Take care of yourselves and take care of your families by taking a day off. It's a commandment. And so then after this, honor your father and your mother. So show honor and respect to your parents, because those are the parents that God gave you. Even though your parents might not be good parents potentially, it's still important to respect them as your parents. That doesn't mean we can't have boundaries with our parents. That doesn't mean that we can't tell our parents no or anything crazy like that. That just means we should show respect to our parents by not cursing them. That's in scriptures. We're not supposed to curse our parents. And also by, praying for them and respecting them as just our parents that God gave us. And this is the first commandment with a promise. That's actually, it's true. And it's also a Bible verse later on, I think in Ephesians. This is a first commandment with a promise that your days will be long and extended. So in other words, this particular commandment has weight behind it to the point where God gave people a promise. If you honor your father and your mother, your days will be extended and long, and it will go well with you in the land which Yahweh your God gives you. So it is important to honor your parents. Even if they drive you nuts sometimes, it's still important to honor them and respect them as the parents God gave you. And then after this, you shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. These are kind of more simplistic commandments that we kind of just understand on a natural level, that we shouldn't murder innocent people, and we also should not commit adultery against, our husbands or wives. We should not steal, because God gives each person exactly what he gives them. So stealing obviously is taking something that does not belong to you because God gave it to a different person. Then after this, you shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. In other words, you shouldn't lie about somebody. And God actually says that false witnesses in court should be put to death, because the false witness in the court could actually potentially put somebody to death. So if a witness goes forward and he or she is a false witness, that person should be put to death, is actually what God says. Then after this, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife. You shall not desire your neighbor's house, his field, or his male servant, his female servant, his ox, donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbors. So we shouldn't have covetous hearts, even though we're not necessarily stealing from that neighbor or committing adultery, right, with that neighbor's wife or husband. We still should not even put those thoughts in our minds that we want something that another person has, because that thing was not given to us by God. And this could mean anything. This could mean a position. This could mean careers. This could really mean anything, because that's what God says. He says anything that is your neighbor's. So we shouldn't covet at all. And that's something that I do really struggle with. I am a very covetous person sometimes. I can be very comparison-y. Like, I like to look at what other people have and compare myself to what that person has. And I think that this particular commandment is the one that gets broken, I think, the most because of social media and just the amount of things we're allowed to see that other people have. I think that as a whole, this might be the one that's broken quite often. But anyway, moving forward, Yahweh spoke all these words to the assembly on the mountain out of the middle of the fire. So he specifically and directly spoke to his people. And then he wrote them on 2 stone tablets. He wrote all these commandments down and gave them to Moses. But when the people heard God's voice out of the middle of the darkness, is what it says, they were horrified. So they come forward to Moses, a bunch of these elders, and they're like, we get it. God does speak with man. He does speak to them and they don't die. However, we are going to die if we continue to hear God's voice, which is somewhat illogical considering the fact that they hadn't died yet. But like I said earlier, maybe they just recognized how small they were in comparison to God and were just horrified of that. So they tell Moses, they're like, Moses, you go near to God and you listen to his voice and you do all that so that we can hear you and everything that God spoke to you. We don't want to hear God's voice, is basically what they say. So Yahweh obviously heard the elders come forward to Moses and say that, And he says, I've heard the voice of the words of the people, which they have spoken to you. They have said well all that they have spoken. And I don't know if that was God commending them or not. I kind of feel like it's not, because of what he says next. Oh, that there were such a heart in them, that they would fear me. It's almost like God is sad in a sense when he hears the people not wanting to hear his voice. Oh, that there were such a heart in them, that they would fear me and keep all my commandments always, that it might be well with them and their children forever. Like, I don't know why. That sounds almost like God is expressing an amount of sadness over the fact that the people don't want to hear his voice. That's me inserting my own opinion into that. I don't know. Maybe God is commending them for not, for like fearing him in a sense. And he's just saying like, I hope that they continue to fear me in the future. Maybe he's saying that. I don't know. But to me, this sounds almost like God is expressing an amount of sadness. But like I said, that's my own opinion. So then afterward, he tells Moses to tell them, return to your tents. And then he says, but as for you, Moses, stand here by me and I'm going to tell you everything. And that's basically when all the laws end up happening. God tells Moses pretty much everything that the people were supposed to know. We know that a lot of that happened back in the book of Exodus, where Moses stayed on top of the mountain and listened to God's voice, listened to everything that God told him to do. That was when he gave Moses the plans for building the temple for him and just various things like that. And maybe God was even recognizing that when Moses stayed there on the mountain, that the people were going to completely rebel against God and start worshiping a man-made image, which is even more ironic because the people had just heard God's voice and the first commandment given to them, don't have any other gods before me and don't make any graven images. And yet 40 days after that happens, they forget God's voice, they forget what had happened, and they make a graven image against God and start worshiping that thing. So then in verse 32, Moses concludes this chapter by saying, you shall observe and do all that Yahweh your God has commanded you. You shall not turn away to the right hand or to the left. So in other words, focus on God and focus on what God tells you to do. Don't turn away in either direction. Focus on what God says. And this is even a warning to us that we shouldn't be following just whatever teaching comes our way. We need to test it with the scriptures. We need to, read the scriptures and make sure that those teachings align with what God has already given us, because the Bible is what God has given us. And we're not supposed to turn away from that teaching that God has given us to listen to something else. We need to test everything with the scriptures that God has given us. And this is a warning that Moses gives the people back then and now. Just, we have God's word, and that is what we are supposed to be following. Well, faithful listeners, I hope you enjoyed the Christmas music and also the episode content today. And if you did, please share it on your platforms. Tell people that the Bible Explained podcast exists. And even if you go onto the podcast platform itself and, rate the podcast, that helps other people find it as well. The more ratings and reviews that it has, as odd as this sounds, it's a weird way to evangelize to people because that helps the podcast get found by more people, the more reviews it has. So rate the podcast and review it. But friends and faithful listeners, don't forget that I'm giving away 2 free chapters of my book, Out of the Mire, when you subscribe to the website, p40ministries.com. But guys, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and that you enjoy the Advent season and all the wonderful Christmas lights. I remember when I was a kid, my family would take me, it was like a yearly tradition, my family would take me to go see all the Christmas lights because that was something that was really popular back where I lived. And so yeah, we'd go see those and I really enjoyed that. So contact me and tell me if you guys like to do that. Tell me where you live, tell me your name, and tell me how you found the podcast. And just, I love hearing from you guys, so you can contact me. You'll find my information in the bio of the podcast episode. Friends and faithful listeners, I'll see you bright and early tomorrow morning for an episode out of Luke. But have a wonderful rest of your day. Happy listening, and God bless.